You just have insurmountable challenges at every single stage, and everything is against you, or anyone you talk to is implicitly, almost by design, wanting to be helpful, and they'll give you feedback and they'll be like, oh, well, you're trying to start this company, integration's a nightmare, you shouldn't even try to integrate with that, like it's impossible. So by design, people will give you lots of feedback, but then at the end of the day, like if you have this vision of how you want to like something you think should exist in the world, it's just like you got to put one foot, as cheesy as it sounds, you got to put one foot in front of the other and just like try to do it, try to move it forward a little bit.
That is our guest this week, Nicole Bocskocsky. She is the CEO and founder of Elaborate, an innovative enterprise SaaS solution designed to cure the doctor's in-basket.
We're an enterprise solution that eliminates the in-basket. So what we like to say is that we cure your in-basket as a doctor. We know the in-basket is one of the number one challenges that doctors have within this country to having a sustainable work-life balance and even ability to deliver on the day-to-day expectations of their jobs. And we cure it. We don't provide a reactive solution where, we're auto-drafting a response or having someone respond for you. We actually take a workflow approach to eliminate the messages that are coming in entirely by addressing the patient's needs or the practitioner's needs upfront.
Efficiency Unlocked is hosted by two tech-savvy physicians and dear friends of mine, Drs. Adam Karu and Dale Gold, who are experts in using technology to automate routine tasks and increase efficiency in everyday and business life. Let's see what they have for us today.
Stay tuned for this series of episodes where we'll be discussing the game-changing impact of AI in the realm of patient care and physician well-being.
Get ready to unlock efficiency with NerdMDs.
Efficiency Unlocked.
We can route you right within the app to those next steps, but it becomes your longitudinal hub for results. And what's really neat is not only is it sort of forward-looking, but we can actually look retrospectively where clinically relevant. Obviously, I don't need to pull results from like 35 years ago for someone to interpret their current health, but we can actually look back historically to pull the relevant data and create that narrative of what the person's health history looks like to date.
Before founding Elaborate, she was a key member of the founding team at Parsley Health, where she served as the VP of Operations, scaling care delivery from seed to Series C. Prior to Parsley, Nicole was at Oscar Health as an early leader. With a background in management consulting, Nicole has a passion first and foremost for problem solving. We hope you enjoy this show. Hey, Nicole, welcome to this week's episode of the NerdMDs podcast, Efficiency Unlocked. We're both really excited to have you on the show today. Welcome.
Thanks, guys, for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and I know Dale and you had a conversation earlier too, so you guys can feel free to add some of that content into today. But I think listeners of the show know we really like to know about the people behind the guests that we have on here and the products that they've helped to create. And we'd love for you to share your story, kind of your why, and what were maybe some of those pivotal moments that got you involved in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's funny is before we started recording, you were sharing a little bit about your background and what you're most interested in, and thinking, you've spent the last 15 years of your life in informatics, and for the reason of understanding how things fit together. And when I look back across, what makes me special, there's something that makes everyone special, but what makes me really tick is solving problems. And so I started my career in consulting, very quickly focused in on healthcare because there were just so many pieces of the puzzle to fix. And more importantly, it felt that regardless of whether you spent 5, 10, 50 years in the industry, you'd always be learning something new because it's frankly so convoluted and complicated. So that really attracted me to the industry. There's obviously sort of a mission component to it of delivering care to people and wanting ultimately to have a healthier population in society that's able to thrive. So those were the pieces that contributed to my interest in sort of healthcare and problem solving and operations. I spent the earlier part of my career focused on large organizations who already had achieved scale and were about how do we deliver maximum outcomes, again, on the payer side and on the ops side. And then I got introduced, I'd say about 5 years into consulting, to the group behind Oscar Health. So in the early days, I was networking with folks and I got introduced to Mario and Josh. They had just filed their charter here in New York to become a full-fledged insurance company as a startup. And I was just really inspired by what they were doing and sort of their vision for the patient digital health experience and how that would translate to a healthy business on the insurance side. And so I joined, I was employee number 68 back in 2014, 2015, and saw that business scale from really what was like a fledgling business trying to like literally call people on the phone to get them enrolled in the exchanges to, a business that scaled to over $6-7 billion valuation by the time I left. While there, I stood up a number of different business units, but one that very quickly attracted me was care delivery and spinning out the first telehealth practice of our kind. As a payer, we offered free telehealth calls for any of our insured members with our own doctors, the first of its kind within the country, actually, and long before COVID. We launched a number of risk adjustment initiatives, our own flagship Oscar Center initiatives. And through that work, I just became really, really excited and interested in understanding how care was actually delivered on the ground, which led me to my role at Parsley Health, joining the founding executive team as the person responsible for leading the clinical org. All of this is to say that I have really enjoyed spending my time thinking about how people solve problems in healthcare, but probably most recently over the last 7 or 8 years, it's been really focused on the people who are solving those problems in healthcare, which is the doctors, because ultimately they're the people who are delivering care, which is what brought me to Elaborate, which I'm happy to share a little bit more about what we do in a second. Just I'll toss it back to you if there's any questions.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think we've had several people on the show that have had, kind of either experiences inside a larger company and then kind of like wanted to maybe join something smaller or start something on their own. But no, I think that's great. And, I think we should discuss a bit more about what Elaborate does. There was obviously some content in the intro to this show, but I know, and I think Dale has kind of some specific questions around that next.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about starting Elaborate. How did that happen to go to employee number one? What sparked that journey? What were some of the initial hurdles of starting a company and why you took that path? And, how did this great path that led you to this point really contribute to what Elaborate is today?
Yep. So Elaborate, we're an enterprise solution that eliminates the in-basket. So what we like to say is that we cure your in-basket as a doctor. We know the in-basket is one of the number one challenges that doctors have within this country to having a sustainable work-life balance and even ability to deliver on the day-to-day expectations of their jobs. And we cure it. We don't provide a reactive solution where we're auto drafting a response or having someone respond for you. We actually take a workflow approach to eliminate the messages that are coming in entirely by addressing the patient's needs or the practitioner's needs upfront and at the time that it's needed. So I'm happy to share a little bit more about that. But I know you guys like stories, so I'll get to the personal stories. So I, at the time that the idea for Elaborate sort of came to fruition, I was responsible for managing 175 person org of clinicians. And in that role, we were in scale mode. So it was all about how do you expand capacity for these folks? How do you ultimately find ways for them to see larger and larger patient panels while also recognizing that these are human beings that you keep putting rocks on someone's back. Eventually their back's going to break, right? And you guys know that, you're clinicians. And so there's a challenge for people who are in healthcare operations because, we understand that there's limitations to what the clinician can do, but we also need to run successful business. And around reimbursement rates, there's, it's no easy piece of cake to make to walk that balance. And so oftentimes I would, I remember this one specific case where I had a doctor call me. She was a newer doctor to our group. She had been with us for about, 5 or 6 months. And she called me in tears at 10 p.m. And this has been someone who had been struggling with more and more patient messages. She was incredibly popular. She quickly grew her patient panel as she joined our group. And she called me and she was like, I can't do this. I've been sitting at my computer for the last 3 hours. I left the office 2 hours, 2 hours before that. I haven't been able to eat. I haven't been able to sleep. I'm just sitting here responding to patient messages. And the worst part is that they come in and put times that I can't predict, where patients are asking about their lab results and abnormal RDW on a CBC at 10 p.m. and I get that message, and the expectation is that the patient's going to get responded to quickly because they've Googled and they've, worked themselves up into a tizzy about it being some sort of blood disorder. And this came at the same time as I myself had been going through some health issues where I was getting testing done. And on the patient side, I saw, hey, this is really interesting. Like, I'm getting these results. I'm getting a bunch of random values that are red and say they're abnormal. I naturally start Googling because that's what I do for every other question in my life. And then I have this impatient panic. And so again, as someone who really, really likes solving problems, I was thinking about this a lot and it was bothering me. And my husband, who is also an entrepreneur, was like, hey, why don't you just what would you envision instead? And so, over Thanksgiving break, I pulled out Google Slides, like literally like the PowerPoint presentation, and started just like workflowing it and drawing, like, here's what a little platform could look like. Here's how you would put together these tools in a way where you could potentially provide a solution to this problem. And that solution actually has held true even 5 years later, to elaborate, which, our flagship product, Notate, is a product that takes the patient's clinical context, so their entire patient chart. And then when a new lab result comes in, we use that chart to contextualize for that patient what the result means and what to do next using our deterministic model. And that allows us to send out an autoresponder with the patient's data upon direct release. So there's no drafting that the clinician needs to do. The patient gets an immediate summary of what the results mean right away at the time that the results are sent out. And then you don't see the barrage of patient medical advice requests because people understand what the results mean and what the doctor wants them to do next.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think going after the faucet to decrease that volume is so true. The anecdote you gave where, your inbox is open 24/7. And, I think that even when you get to, where I last had my patient panel, working 50% leadership, 50% patient panel, but Outlook never stopped with my one inbox and my patient inbox never stopped. And it's a real challenge. And
Yeah.
I think that, it's a real good way to solve it. What were some of the things as you started in the beginning that were harder than you expected? Obviously you got to that point now, but what were some of the really initial hurdles of starting that company?
Yeah, and I'll answer that question in a sec. I think what you're pointing to is a really important one, which, oftentimes, like, we sell into enterprise health systems, right? Like lots of Epic users and the like. And so often this question of ROI comes up, right? It's like, how do I measure ROI? How do I measure ROI? I need to make it clear what the impact is on the system. And there are measurable points of ROI that we can point to, and it depends in part like what that sort of systems in basket burden looks like, and we use their own data to measure that, et cetera. But this intangible feeling of I am always on, it feels really similar to when I was a consultant and had my BlackBerry. I know I'm aging myself a little bit. For those who don't know what a BlackBerry is, it's like an iPhone, but for business people who are old. But I would just have my BlackBerry and it would always be messaging me, and I'd be having dinner with my husband and I couldn't actually ever get offline. And so I think there's oftentimes people outside of healthcare don't really understand why this problem is so painful, because they also have a lot of work and they're also working hard and working late. But what they don't understand is that when a patient with a clinical issue is messaging you as a clinician who has taken the sacred oath, it is really not necessarily your responsibility or expectation, but something within you that's more often than not going to pull you to read that message, even if you're watching a movie with your kids or whatever you do for fun in your life. So that's the piece that is this immeasurable ROI, where it allows your employees to actually take rest time, to truly rest, which allows them to then come back and work much more productively for the system at large. So I just wanted to point that out because oftentimes it's something that I think people don't really understand when they're not in healthcare, just how sort of responsible physicians feel for their patients. It's truly amazing to see it as an operator.
Yeah, I love the
That's
BlackBerry
great.
example. And for the record, Dale and I would have had BlackBerries, but we were so poor medical student-wise when BlackBerries were out, we didn't have one. So
There you go.
I mean, I think I splurged on a Palm Trio actually in med school,
nice.
and that was only because I needed to have the Hippocrates program, so I could at least have some medicine knowledge and maybe help me with some of my differential diagnosis. But
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, well, you never got to experience the joy of BBMing. So that'll forever be a lost experience for you. But yeah, so maybe to go back to your question, Dale, I'm not intending to sidestep it. So yeah, early days. So for anyone who has an idea out there, one, when you first start a business, I think when I talk to people, because I also advise startups, new startups who are not Elaborate. And when I talk to people, oftentimes they're like, oh, I have this idea, but I don't know how this is going to work or that is going to work. Integration's going to be so hard, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, just start from the basics. Literally go into Google Slides, do the work of actually understanding how would this fit? Where would this button go? Where would this, if you had this message, do this thing, like what would you expect to happen next? And you'd be shocked how many people sort of skip that part of prototyping, because it sounds so sort of obvious, and it's like, oh yeah, like I have the idea in my head, but until you actually put it down on paper, and even better is like build a mini prototype version, whether that be in like a Figma, hiring a developer to help you, like whatever that might be. These things can be done fairly inexpensively now, especially with all the tools available online, much easier than 5 or 10 years ago. But you'd be surprised how many sort of obstacles you can encounter along that way that you then overcome just through the process of actually iterating and problem solving physically, like actually writing it down and actually writing a spec for it. So that was one of the first challenges, was just working through how would the workflow work. And one of the biggest challenges that I encountered, especially in the early days, was this question of would the clinicians be comfortable and confident releasing results without their eyes on it, and releasing not just the results, because at that point cures regulation was sort of coming into effect. So I knew that they would have to release the results. That was not up to me, that was the government. I knew that they would have to release the results automatically without a clinician review, but would they feel comfortable with an automated summary being sent out to the patient that explained to them what it meant? And so there were lots of iterations where, I was like, listen, I never want this note to diagnose and tell a patient a diagnosis. I never want this note to sort of change a clinical protocol or change the patient's, dosage instructions. But could you actually get to a point where you give the patient a protocolized based understanding of what the result means and what to conceptually do next, whether that be, hey, wait for someone to call you, schedule a visit, et cetera. That I felt confident we could do. And that's because I had sat with clinicians for 7 or 8 years and seen them do it over and over and over again for the routine cases that you're both thinking of, a CMP, a CBC, a basic hemoglobin A1C. There is a protocol approach. It's just the hard work of writing down all of those rules that live inside your clinicians' heads, and using clinical resources like UpToDate to build essentially the logic that would give someone confidence to say, actually, yes, this does cover all of the edge cases that I might be worried about an automated message sending without my approval. So that was one of the challenges up front. And even, it's funny because one of our clinical advisors is one of my oldest doctor friends, Dr. Amy Esposito. And she was one of the first people I called when I had this idea and sort of had finished speccing out the idea. And she said, oh, this will never work. You can never possibly programatize all the stuff in my head. Never, ever, ever. And now she's one of our biggest supporters because she's seen it work as a user and as someone who's actively contributing to the clinical content. We should have had her on the podcast. She'll come next.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I know that we had talked about this before, and Adam's hearing some of it live now. But I think back, early on when Adam and I first started like experimenting with ChatGPT, and one of his like first use cases of thinking things through was, like helping with results and translating it. So that's why I thought this would be really a good synergy with some of the things we like to talk about on the show. And I'll hand it over to you, Adam. Do you have a follow up?
Yeah, I mean, I love your stories and examples of kind of weaving in how this can work in real life is great. But can we like peel back the layer a little bit, and could you explain a little bit more of kind of the details of how Elaborate helps to really cut down the burden? I mean, you've mentioned some of these things where it's kind of more upfront and these, but we'd love for you to share that with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the majority of solutions on the market, or even homegrown solutions on the market today for in-basket, they're reactive in nature. So think about these solutions. I'm going to hire a nursing pool team to respond to messages as they come in. I'm going to outsource the calls to a call center. I'm going to use a large language model within my EMR to draft responses. All of them assume that the message has already been created and now I have to respond to it in some way. The novel approach that our business has taken is that these messages are a function of a broken workflow. So it's indicative of a sick workflow wherein you have not actually thought through what the patient or practitioner needs at different points of the workflow. And therefore, someone has to manually go out of their way, patient has to manually go out of their way, send a message to try to get themselves back onto the happy path. So as an operator, like essentially this in-basket problem is a very, very large edge case where we haven't actually designed the workflow around what the people need at an individual time. And so the way that, again, this labs product works is that we are embedded in the EMR. So we, have, for example, we have an Epic application. It's in the marketplace. We also have our HL7 feeds with them. And what that means is that when a patient goes and gets a lab done, let's say, I don't know, I came in for a sore throat or something. My doctor orders a blood panel for me. I go get the labs done. That lab comes back into the EMR. We get a copy of that lab at the exact same time that it's come back into the EMR. And we have me, patient Nicole's clinical chart, my previous diagnoses, my previous lab results, the reason for my visit, who I am as a person. And all of that information is used to contextualize what that new result that came in meant. And we're able to do that through our own deterministic algorithm, which, to put it very bluntly, is essentially a multi-million row if-then statement. If patient has previously had this diagnosis and this range of results, then communicate this. If patient had this other diagnosis and this diagnosis, then this. If the patient is a female versus a male, you can imagine. And so all of the different factors that we have within our system are based on, again, who the patient is, and then personalizing that interpretation for them. In the event that we are unable to come up with an interpretation because we don't have enough information, either the data might be missing, or it's a novel test, like when Cologuard came onto the market, 10 years ago, it was a novel test. So if we don't have enough information, then we would tell the patient, hey, we aren't able to provide a personalized summary for you. In this case, the practitioner will follow up. And then in those cases, what's really neat is that our system is ambiently listening. So then any follow-up that the practitioner does to the patient after a lab result has been released, we're listening to. We're using large language models to compare and contrast with what we sent to see if there's something clinically significant that differed. And if there is, we're sending it to our clinical team to review and ultimately customize the client's version of Elaborate to better fit their clinical standards. So it actually learns over time, but not in the way that sort of a large language model does, where you don't have the predictability of the same response being sent to the same clinical case over and over again. You just don't have that today with a large language model. And so our product truly is no hallucination. So you get a little bit of the best of both worlds.
No, I love that. And honestly, the way you explain that, I think our audience is I think we don't know our exact audience. I mean, because it's kind of hard to know that. And
At least you
in
guys.
this sense, yeah. But I think I think there's a fair amount of people that, have a tech or a digital kind of health background. But I think what you just explained, I mean, I think even, I always call it like my mom meter, if my mom could like listen to this and just kind of understand it. And I think that's what's cool. I mean, the fact that your model, is that deterministic piece where it's that repeatable, which I think is really, I think it's important for people to understand that difference, because right now it's like a swirl of everything, and a lot of these solutions out there are, black boxes, and there may be some sort of human in the loop that's doing some sort of curation, but they're just trying to catch the mistakes. They're not actually trying to feed that in. So no, I think that's great. I think,
yeah. And what I'll also maybe, sorry to
no,
interrupt,
go
what I'll
for it.
also add to that is, the models that we're all describing have been trained on the internet. And once again, if I look up, what does my abnormal RDW mean? That's what your ChatGPT or large language model response is going to be. It's going to be the same information that you're otherwise finding online. So the problem is actually not resolved. It's just moved to a different platform or communicated through a different mechanism. And with this type of protocolized tool, it's very common to see this in sort of financial industries or healthcare industries when you have regulation, privacy, or safety concerns. is you want a black and white answer. I want to know every single time I have a patient who looks like this, they're going to get this message. And the only way you can do that is by investing the time and resources, AKA money, to sit down and write them all down. And so that's what we've done over 5 years, is curate this algorithm with the sort of active support of tons of clinicians who have been working on it, both on the ground as users and as advisors and part of the company. And they've literally, again, documented all of these clinical rules and components where, for example, with our early versions of the lipid panel, when we would do lipid panel interpretations, we would use some of the basic stuff, age and gender, blah, 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 some of the sort of ranges that you would see in UpToDate. But we very quickly came to a conclusion with our users that we needed to also incorporate ASCVD, because that's ultimately how sort of lots of clinicians are using that information to contextualize what the lipid panel means and what is a clinically significant change or not. And so it was through that sort of organic evolution that we've really refined some of the, what I call colloquial clinical rules that live in your heads, but aren't anywhere like up to date. And so those are the types of rules that a large language model just won't have at its disposal, at least not for a very long time, in a way that you would trust it to automatically respond on your behalf.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, we talked about ROI, which of course, Adam and I really care a lot about inbox being something to solve, but it is a challenge. What have you studied? What data do you have? What kind of results can you share where, this is being used at some level of scale, and, what did they show?
Yes. So to answer your question around ROI, so first off, during our process of, getting to know health systems, obviously that's a multi-month, in some cases, multi-year process. We'll actually work with the prospect to review their own data to scope out the size of the problem. We do that for two reasons. One, I want to make sure that there's enough of an itch to scratch together. It doesn't really help anyone if you end up working with Elaborate because I'm a great salesperson, and then 6 months later you're angry at me because it hasn't actually given you the ROI you expected. So the first thing we do is we will pull signal data. We'll pull a business BI report, and then we do some spot surveying of your team if you're amenable to it. We then use that data to set benchmarks around which we set our pilot targets and then year 1, year 2 targets. So we actually, in some cases, have contracts that have guarantees where if we hit certain milestones, that unlocks additional tranches for us and additional expansion opportunities. But we won't actually move from a pilot stage into a full implementation until we've hit certain milestones. Again, because it doesn't help me if I expand in year 1, then I'm hurting myself in year 2 if you're not having a great experience. The ways in which we typically measure ROI are, again, a little bit dependent on the system. Just to give you an example, some systems, are more financially strapped. And so in their cases, they're really focused on, can this in any way generate additional revenue, or how can you very explicitly walk me through costs that we're cutting? In some cases, there are systems that are a little bit more sort of wellness focused and physician efficiency focused because of, again, the capacity needs that they have as a broader system to feed into other specialties. Primary care is ultimately the front door for all health systems. So it depends a little bit. We customize our ROI to ensure that we're delivering on what the system ultimately wants and customizing the product to, for example, if it's a revenue generation play, we're obviously going to tell the patient to sort of follow up through specific channels that might generate revenue for them, which is ultimately a system decision. But what we're finding is really exciting. It's a fewfold. The first thing that I think speaks volumes is we have natural adoption curves where we start with a group through a pilot, as most sort of companies like ours do. We'll start with a pilot, 1 to 2 sites. Somewhere between 15, 20 clinicians are testing and trialing the technology. And what's really cool is we are not getting stuck in pilot stage. There's so many of these businesses that are getting stuck in pilot stage where, we are piloting this new technology, but there's 4 people at the entire system of 10,000 who are using it, and they're using it like once a month. Our technology is used by default every single day for every single patient for whom labs are being ordered. And what's really neat is that those folks are having such a good experience that then, they're having conversations with other groups. We're very quickly being pulled into adoption mode with other groups that are within the same specialty and then additional specialties. Just to give you one example, we had a client who started with us, again, in that 15 to 15 to 20 sort of practitioner count. Very quickly expanded to additional sites. Within 4 months, we were live with all of PCP, and within the next 2 months, probably thereafter, we were live across all specialties. So 6 months, and you have like a 20xing, 25xing of user counts. It's very substantial and very, very fast relative to comps. So that's honestly the first biggest ROI is I will tell you is that people are actually using the tool, which is most exciting and compelling for anyone who's in informatics and takes the time to go through InfoSec and onboarding with a new vendor. It's a huge challenge to get those tools actually used. The other piece is around time in basket. So we've seen actually a notable decrease in both time in basket volume, so actual message counts, and calls coming into call centers for those groups who are actually set up for those types of call center workflows. They tend to vary, again, somewhere between 15 to 20% reduction you'll see within the first 6 to 12 months, depending on how quickly you expand across the whole group. Because again, if it's just like 10 doctors, you're not going to see that much reduction across the full system.
Do you study the patient satisfaction? Or do they like it? How do you have that studied?
Yes, of course. So we have patient satisfaction that we measure in 2 ways. We do have NPS. I tend to be a little bit skeptical of NPS because I think just asking someone, do they like it? They're just going to say 1 or 5, I like it or I hate it. So we have a great patient satisfaction. I think it's like 4.7 or something, but I don't think that's as exciting as our other metrics. One of them is how well did the patient understand their results? And then the second one is, do they know what to do next? So we have an 87%, I understand my results and I know what to do next across all users. And that includes folks who, are speaking a different language, are traditionally underserved by communities where they actually don't know how to navigate the healthcare system. They're ending up in the ER over and over again because they don't know what to do next. So that for me is actually very compelling. And again, most importantly is we're actually seeing a notable reduction in the amount of patient messages that are coming into their doctor after the fact, which for me is indicative of the fact that we've solved the sickness in the system. We've actually solved the workflow where the patient doesn't need to follow up with the clinician to understand what to do next. They've already understood it through the automated message that went out.
No, I love that. I was like, and Dale asked that question about the patient. I was going to actually ask too, just if you could just elaborate. No pun intended.
Yeah, see, I know. I was waiting until someone was going to do it. I had to hold myself back. Yeah.
But no, I'm just like trying to picture too, because I think, again, I think a lot of people are have their care delivered in an Epic system or a Cerner system. So they're used to like a portal and that sort of thing. But I guess, could you just explain a little bit how this does look on like the patient side or the consumer side for them? And how it kind of meshes with like the existing, patient portal that I think everyone's used to.
Yeah. So what's really neat is that, again, we have an Epic supported option. So our product, our narrative note goes out right with your results right into my chart. So where you would log into your, I'm here in New York, my Mount Sinai, where I'd log into my chart. I come into my page that says lab results, and right at the top, there's a summary that says, hi there, Nicole, this is an automated message for your CMP. It looks like here were the findings that we found. It will surface both things that are good and things that we want to talk to you or follow up on, depending again on what's clinically relevant for you in your case. And then it will indicate to you what to do next. And in those cases where we are able to sort of communicate what to do next without stepping on the toes of the practitioner, think, lifestyle, diet change type stuff for lipids and hemoglobin A1C readings. That's an area where we can give the patient automatic guidance and then tell them what to do next, whether it be facilitating automated repeat testing, et cetera. So that's really like within the patient experience, it's sitting right there in my chart. For our more innovative groups who have invested in building their own app, which increasingly we are seeing systems, within across the country say, hey, like my chart isn't quite scratching the itch of what I want to be able to provide to my patients. We do offer also a front end digital experience, which is far more interactive. It technically can live in my chart as well, but we found that once it's owned by the system, we can white label it. It's embedded within an app, and it will literally guide you through your health trends. Hey, Nicole, here's all of these like key markers of health over time. Here are the things that we identified last time that you want to work on and the specific next steps. We can route you right within the app to those next steps. But it becomes your longitudinal hub for results. And what's really neat is not only is it sort of forward looking, but we can actually look retrospectively where clinically relevant. Obviously, I don't need to pull results from like 35 years ago for someone to interpret their current health, but we can actually look back historically to pull the relevant data and create that narrative of what the person's health history looks like to date. And for the patient, I mean, I wish this was a visual thing because I could pull it up right now and show you, but it's a totally different lab experience where, you know, for a lot of these system partners, the lab result experience has almost been like the ugly orphan of their app, where they're like, we have this cool scheduling flow, we have this really cool like patient intake thing. And then I'm like, how are you sharing results? And they're like, oh, it's this like kind of janky list where it's connected to the PDFs from Quest that I've piped in, and it doesn't look good. And the patient has to like super zoom in to view what their results even mean. And it has all the same problems as before. And now it's taken that experience and actually made it into the flagship of the app, where it's like, hey, 90% of people who are logging into a portal are actually coming in to view results about themselves, not to read content that you've built that has maybe nothing to do with them. This is a way to create far more personalization within your own app around who that patient is and what's relevant for them.
No, very, very cool. No, thanks for, it's cool explaining the part, like the fully integrated piece, and then this kind of more where you guys are controlling a lot more of that experience, but can still be, you know, kind of white labeled and bolted into an existing system, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the patient gets the benefit of the experience. However, the sort of heart of the business is still around the practitioners, which is the harder nut to crack. But our mission, you know, our vision is, we say this every week at our huddle, so I'll say it again. Our vision is to solve their healthcare crisis of burnout in this country. And so while we have built like lots of technology that makes the workflow and the patient engagement experience far better, we think of ourselves ultimately first and foremost as the practitioner's best friend and the practitioner's efficiency tool.
Yeah, love that. Dale, do you have a last question or follow-up that you want to ask before we jump into the nerd alert round? Because I think Nicole is probably nerdy enough for the questions I'm going to ask.
Sure, let's just jump into the nerd alert lightning round.
Are you ready, Nicole?
Thanks, Nicole.
Sure. I don't know what to expect.
No, I'd say these are friendly questions. I think we share this, that, you know, obviously on podcasts, there's a bit of preparatory work that goes into you know, producing a show and making it sound good and coherent. But I think specifically for these questions, we don't share them because we do like to have kind of that natural reaction. But so I have about 5 or 6 here.
Right. Let's do it. I'm ready.
All right, so first one, what's your favorite thing about your job right now?
Yeah. So my favorite thing about my job is that I get to solve problems every day. So the job of someone who starts their own company, again, for people who are interested and or thinking about it, is that every single day you will have a problem to solve. It's literally my mantra in the morning especially when you're having a tougher day, is like, okay, this is just the challenge du jour. And so the counter of that is you will always have a problem every day. There will never be a day where you're like, this is just an amazing day and everything's gone perfectly, because there's always something to improve. And so I love that opportunity to continue to improve myself, my team, my product. But it's really fun to just like always have a fire that you're tackling. Yeah. I'm a natural firefighter.
Love that. Yeah. When the fires go out, it gets kind of boring.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm not advocating forest fires or anything.
I was going to say, I don't think in your current geography you should be advocating.
No, that's a good one. I guess follow up to that though is, if you could have kind of any job in the world, even potentially different than what you're doing right now, what would that be?
It's a great question. I think someone, actually a friend of mine who's starting a game company, this is kind of random, a game company was asking, is building custom games based on your own answers in the questionnaire. And this was on one of them. So if you had any job that was not your current job, so I'll assume I can't have my current job, which I love, what would your job be? And I thought about these, like some of these high stakes productions, for example, like putting on the World Summit or putting on the Met Gala. Like, who does that? That must be a crazy job. And think about all the moving pieces and all of the complexity that comes with it. It's such a highly executional job, which again, I love. And you're just every single day, like blocking, not just blocking and tackling one problem, but you have like a laundry list of 100 problems every single day. But then there's something quite visual about this sort of event, this culminating event that comes together and brings people together to solve a thing, and, you know, creates that space. So ultimately, like, I love being a founder. I have that entrepreneurial spirit. I love working on products and sort of delivering new solutions. But if I had to pick something totally out there and different, I think that would be an area that would be pretty cool.
Awesome. No, I love that. All right, so this is a pivot from what I obviously focus on some job things, but if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Mac and cheese, no question, all day.
Like homemade style mac and cheese, like legit, or does it matter?
No, like Annie's.
Yeah.
I'm so excited I have a kid now because now I have an excuse to just like eat mac and cheese all day.
Yeah. All right. What's the most adventurous thing that you've done?
Well, there's probably two. One easy, fast answer is skydiving, which I did with my intern class back when I was an intern in consulting many, many, many moons ago. But probably the more long-term longitudinal thing is I had this crazy idea. I had a knee injury many, many years ago. I couldn't even run a half mile. I went to PT, recovered. I had a goal to finish a 5K. I did that. Had a goal to finish a 10K, did that. Then I was like, okay, let's do a half marathon, did that. Then I was like, what if I did a full one? So I did my first full marathon in 2017. And then after that, I was like, okay, I see these signs for this thing called the majors, which is completing the world's six top marathons, Tokyo, Berlin, London, New York, Boston, and Chicago. And I was like, I should do that too. So that was probably the craziest thing I decided to do. I finished 5 out of 6, and then I got pregnant. So now I am working my way up to finish it so that, you know, next time I'm on the podcast, you can hold me accountable to have finished the full
Very
Monty.
cool. Very cool. Yeah, that is something that I think Dale and I will never do. But
never, you don't know. I said never too. I couldn't even run a half mile, but you.
So what's the location that you have left to do?
Tokyo. It's so hard to get into and so far.
Awesome. All right, 2 more questions. One, favorite childhood memory.
Wow, great question. That's a tough one. You know, I just remember this like one park that my mom used to take me when I was just a little kid. And it was, we stayed in the same house until I was, 14 or 15. So I had my whole childhood there. And this park became not only the place where some of my earliest memories were, just being on the swings, but as I became a little older, and again, when back in the old days, my family would just let me run around the neighborhood for like 12 hours a day without any supervision. And so, me and a group of family friends, all guys, would just like go and play hide and seek in this crazy huge park, and go through, running through creeks and climbing trees and getting our knees scuffed up. And we'd come home, at 6 or 7 p.m. and would be just an adventure, just a full day of adventure. So yeah, I remember that. I don't know that exists anymore. It seems like now kids have like cell phones at the age of 3 years old, but that was just such a fun, easy time where it's just like pure joy, and the adventure of hide and seek, which is the best game ever.
Oh yeah, that was a regular game in my neighborhoods as well. I lived on a cul-de-sac growing up, and it was actually like a double cul-de-sac. So it was like this really cool, like single entrance, but then it went both ways and dead ended. So it almost looked like a barbell, and it was cool because it was a young kind of neighborhood and young families. And so we owned that street, and, and everyone knew if a car came on there, like you get out of the way. But lots of memories of running through bushes that I probably shouldn't have and being all scuffed up.
It's that early problem solving.
Yeah, early problem solving. Yeah, there was one where now my family knows about this, so I can share it. But there was one where there was this like little lake nearby in the park, and there was this little sewer grate thing that you had to climb through to get to the middle of the lake, and there was this little intake drainage pipe. And so we as little kids climbed through. It was so dangerous in retrospect, but climbed through this little pipe to go and sit in the middle of the lake. And so we just sat in the middle of the lake. And I remember my mom coming and trying to find us because, again, we didn't have cell phones. And then she saw us sitting in the middle of the lake. She started screaming her head off. So it's, it's just crazy stuff that you do as a kid that you look back and you're like, oh, how did I survive?
Yeah, it is sometimes a wonder why many of us are still alive. The last question we like to ask in this round is around, like, do you have a personal efficiency hack, or do you have a tool that, you would like to share with the listeners and us?
It's a great question. Not one that I was prepared for. You're right. So this is totally off the cuff. I eat the frog, which everyone probably knows what that is, but if not, I'll explain it. You basically have your to-do list, and there's always the 1 to 2 things that you're just like, I just am dragging my feet on it. It's hard. It's like maybe conceptual. It's this big meaty problem. So that's always the thing I work on first in the mornings. My team knows not to schedule things with me in the morning. And in a lot of ways, that's a lot of what it's like to build a business. It's like you just have insurmountable challenges at every single stage, and everything is against you, or, anyone you talk to is implicitly, almost by design, wanting to be helpful, and they'll give you feedback, and they'll be like, oh, well, you're trying to start this company. Integration's a nightmare. You shouldn't even try to integrate with Epic. It's impossible. So by design, people will give you lots of feedback. But then at the end of the day, if you have this vision of how you want to, something you think should exist in the world, it's just you got to put one foot, as cheesy as it sounds, you got to put one foot in front of the other and just try to do it. Try to move it forward a little bit. So eating the frog is my efficiency hack. I don't know that it's a easily hackable thing. It's not like add this Chrome extension to your browser, but it does make a big difference when you start with the most important thing and start your day with trying to move it forward. Because the little stuff checking your email or answering a Slack, it's whatever. That stuff is not actually going to move the needle on the business, the product, the idea, whatever. No,
I love eating the frog. I think that's a good way to wrap today. But Nicole, thank you for being on the show. And I loved learning about Elaborate and you. And I know Dale did too. He was talking praises after the first time he spoke with you and said, oh, she'd be great on this show. So wish you the best of luck, and obviously keep in contact with us.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it. And hopefully the next time we chat, we've cured the in-basket for you guys too. So stay tuned.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Cool.
Thank you for listening to Efficiency Unlocked, Nerd Tested, MD Approved, a Nerd MD's podcast by Drs. Adam Carew and Dale Gold.